long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, there was a podcast. A magical podcast. Where 3 people got together and talked about the best games ever created, period. However, today, it's just 2 people getting together to talk about 2 of the greatest games, period. And today, it's just myself, Jack Gardner, and my good friend, Daniel Jones. Sadly, Jeremy Brown is not with us today because he is feeling a little bit under the weather. Turns out he came down with one of those space parasites.
Yeah, I think he got one of those, like, worms that crawls in your ear and...
Oh, yeah, the Star Trek worm.
Yeah, the Star Trek worm thing. Oh, that thing used to freak the crap out of me when I was a kid, man.
Yeah, those things were gross. The practical effects in Wrath of Khan were great.
Yeah, that scene really messed with me. But we're not talking about Star Trek.
No.
We're talking about Star Wars because it's Star Wars week.
It really is.
I know it's Christmas week, but it's really just Star Wars week. Christmas comes every year. Star Wars comes every decade and a half or so.
Yeah, so it's kind of a big deal. And we thought we'd talk a little bit about our favorite Star Wars games. Unfortunately, you're not going to hear Jeremy talk about Lego Star Wars, which is what he was going to champion this week. I know I would have liked to hear about that, but this week you'll be hearing Daniel Jones try and convince everyone, the world, that Star Wars Dark Forces is the best Star Wars game. And, we're going to talk about that, and then I'm going to try and convince you that Knights of the Old Republic is the best Star Wars game. And you know what? That's pretty much a shoo-in right there. I mean, I won. Let's just pack up the podcast now.
I mean, here's the thing. I can't really... we're not going to be debating against each other on this episode because neither of us have really played the other game. I have very little experience with Knights of the Old Republic, but as somebody who likes shooters more than RPGs, Dark Forces is the pinnacle of Star Wars shooters, and I will argue it against Jedi Outcast and Dark Forces 2 any day.
Would you even argue it against Republic Commando?
Yes.
Ooh, okay.
And the Battlefront and all that. Yep.
All right. Well, and I, for my part, have not played Star Wars Dark Forces, so, I mean, take my opinion with a little bit of a grain of salt, or whatever Star Wars spices there are. I'm not that big of a nerd, that I know. It's definitely not Skrelak. So...
I didn't get that.
What?
I didn't get that reference.
It wasn't a reference. I just made up a word.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I thought it was like a reference to something.
It sounded like a thing. I felt pretty proud of myself about that. So, anyway. Yeah. And really, before we get into it, thank you so much, everyone who's tuned in to listen, and it really means a lot to us when you comment or, follow or, share this podcast with the people you love. Because, honestly, we do this largely for fun, and it's really cool to see it grow and become something kind of unique and cool. And so, yeah, just thank you to all of you lovely listeners out there. You're great.
Yeah. We did another podcast for quite some time, and we enjoyed that, but it got to the point where it just ended up being us talking every week about whatever, and typically it ended up being us talking like maybe every month or so. So we needed some direction, and I think all 3 of us feel reinvigorated. So hopefully you guys like this concept. And I think my favorite thing about it is that each episode is kind of timeless because you can go back a year from now and listen to the Dark Souls episode, and there's not a whole lot in there that won't still be relevant in a year, you know?
Right.
We won't be talking about the latest news and rumors, so.
Yeah, I think we benefit a lot from the structure of this show.
For sure.
Yeah, with that, take it away with Dark Forces. I'm interested to hear your hot take on Dark Forces.
All right, so Dark Forces, for those who aren't really familiar with the game, it was the first Star Wars themed first-person shooter. First official, actually, Star Wars themed first-person shooter. The first one to really come out, I think, was a Doom mod.
Really?
That somebody just, someone just put stormtroopers in, and put in some, like, Star Wars textures into Doom. And that kind of inspired Dark Forces, and LucasArts, the team at LucasArts, to create Dark Forces. But I think they were actually already working on it before that came out. They started Dark Forces before Doom released.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
they
it's
started
crazy.
development on it before Doom came out. And when you look at it, structurally, it's a lot like Doom in the way the levels are designed. Like, one of the best things about Doom is the way it forces you to backtrack and kind of creates, every level has, like, a flow to it. Like, you go here, you get this key, then you have to find the door that just opened, that key goes to, or maybe you stepped on a switch and now you have to go back and you have to find that door. But, you know, maybe you walk in this room and all of a sudden a bunch of monsters pop up and attack you. And Dark Forces works in much the same way, but they put like a Star Wars spin on it, and the Star Wars spin is more than just like, oh, now there's stormtroopers where there weren't before. What they do is, like, they give each mission a structure that I think is similar to, like, GoldenEye. You have mission objectives that you review before the mission starts, and then you have to go and do them. And if you do a certain thing, it will trigger an event such as a ship landing and bringing in some more soldiers. Or, like, there's one particular scene where we're going to go into spoilers, so it's not a big deal.
Huge spoiler warning for this episode.
Yes, spoilers for Dark Forces and Knights of the Old Republic, but Dark Forces is all about this dark stormtrooper army that the Empire is trying to raise. They're trying to create these, like, genetically modified stormtroopers that have the dark side of the Force infused in them. So it's kind of silly, but when you first face those guys, it's amazing and it's scary and it's all dark. And one of the other amazing things that game does is it's so simple, but there are scenes where it's pitch black, but when you shoot your blaster, it lights up the room.
Oh, that's neat.
And if my memory serves me correctly, that happens when you first encounter the dark troopers. It's dark and they're coming at you, and these guys are way more powerful than a regular stormtrooper, and you fire your blaster and the room lights up, and every time you fire, they're a little bit closer. It's fantastic.
Kind of like those weeping angels from, like, Doctor Who.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And for some reason, I keep getting it mixed up with, I think, Star Wars Shadows of the Empire. But this came out, I think, before that, right? Shadows of the Empire was on N64.
Yeah, Shadows of the Empire was third person, and it came out in 1997.
Yeah, something like that.
I-
Maybe 96?
It might have been 96 for the N64. Yeah, I think it was 96. It wasn't a launch game, but it came out like a few weeks after launch or something like that.
Okay.
I loved that game back in the day too, but that game has not aged very well at all.
No? I haven't played it in
No.
a long time, so.
Oh no, not at all. Like the blurry textures of the Nintendo 64 and the third person controls where you had to hold the Z button to aim, and it was incredibly loose, but you couldn't walk while aiming. So you had to stand in place, hold the Z button, look up and down, and like the slightest flick of the joystick and you're looking at the ceiling. It was insane.
Like GoldenEye controls.
Worse.
Oh, really?
Oh, much worse.
Oh, that's
yeah.
saying something.
So that game, I also loved Rogue Squadron
Okay.
and Rogue Leader on GameCube. I don't think those games have quite aged as well as Dark Forces, in my opinion. And I think the reason that Dark Forces has aged so well is because it did take a lot of inspiration from Doom, but it also set a lot of new standards and started some new practices in the first-person genre that hadn't been done in the few years since Wolfenstein came out. And I just want to mention some of them. Like the lighting, like I already mentioned, was dynamic in a way that we had never seen in a first-person game before. You could look up and down.
Mm-hmm.
It was the first-person shooter to allow you to do that. It's a simple thing.
That's a huge deal. It's a huge deal to be able to take advantage of a 3D environment.
Right. Instead, rather than just, in Doom, your weapon would automatically just aim up or down. It would just kind of auto-aim towards your target. And in this, you see your gun, like, actually going up and down. And that's a big deal. The sound design was exceptional. The level design is on par with Doom at times. And it also had, like, a story. And the story is not great, but it had these cutscenes that still hold up because they were done in the LucasArts adventure game style.
What kind of style was that?
I haven't
played a lot.
Hand-drawn animated style.
Okay.
Sort of like, looked a lot like Full Throttle, but in Star Wars universe.
Okay.
And it set off what turned out to be a really great and successful franchise for Star Wars games, in Jedi Knight and Jedi Outcast and Jedi Academy, which were all pretty good games. Jedi Outcast is generally considered to be the best, and I think people loved that Kyle Katarn became a Jedi and you could use a lightsaber and force powers. But for me, I was a purist and I really just enjoyed the tight shooting of the Dark Forces.
And is that kind of why you're going with Dark Forces over Outcast?
Yep.
Because you just said, like, Outcast is the best, right? But
well, that's generally considered to be the best,
okay.
But for me personally, Dark Forces is... It still holds up as a really good shooter, and I found the level design in the later games to just be kind of bland and dull. And Dark Forces at the time, we had never seen... Like, there was X-Wing, and that had it too. But the kind of authenticity that game had was unrivaled in Star Wars video games. I mean, outside of that, I was playing tons of Star Wars games at the time, but I was playing, like, Rebel Assault 2, which was this, like, full motion video, awful, like, arcade shooter game. It was terrible.
Oh my goodness,
And
I haven't thought about that game in a long time.
I played the crap out of that game, but it was not good.
I have very, very poor memory of that game, but I remember even as a kid, I saw like one of the cutscenes or something, like maybe I was at a friend's house. I don't exactly remember, but the acting in those cutscenes was just terrible.
Oh yeah, it really was.
Do you think that that's something that, because I can't off the top of my head think of an FMV game where the acting was genuinely good. Do you think that was just kind of a thing in the 90s where actors would get, called to video game FMV recording sessions and just phone it in because who cares? It's just a game. Like, is that...
Maybe, or maybe they just got kind of bad actors because these actors that couldn't get work were offered these roles and they took them because they weren't getting other roles. I don't know.
That could be.
Maybe that's a bad way of looking at it. But
I mean, but like some FMV games had like big name actors attached. Like Christopher Lloyd, I know, did an FMV game.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, probably just a bunch of them were just phoning it in. Yeah. Or maybe the performances just didn't translate well in FMV. Like, that's possible.
Yeah, that is possible.
Also, they probably weren't working with the best scripts.
And they probably also weren't working with the best directors, because directing a game is way different than directing a movie. And I'm guessing that they probably didn't hire like a film director for most FMV games.
No.
Yeah.
But back to a game that still has an entertaining story.
Right.
So Dark Forces. So yeah, the Dark Trooper thing is a little bit silly, but the rest of it really works for me. Like the first mission, your objective is to steal the plans to the Death Star, the first Death Star.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It's fantastic.
So, in pre-Disney takeover Star Wars canon, Kyle Katarn stole the plans to the Death Star?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if the game was canon, but I think so. Yeah.
Oh, man, that's crazy. I guess I always assumed it was the Bothans.
No, they stole the plans to the second Death Star.
Okay.
Many Bothans died
to
get us this information.
Thanks, Mon
was in Return of the Jedi, not New Hope.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yep. And I mean, there were just little touches, like your ship would come in at the end of every mission to like a landing zone and pick you up, and you really could see your ship come in, and it was a big 3D model of a spaceship that came down, and you didn't walk into it. You kind of just like, well, it was weird. Like you would walk near it, and then you'd hit escape and choose next mission. So it was weird how you had to end the missions, but still, it was cool to see your ship just come down and land in front of you.
Yeah.
Yep. And just the novelty of using different Star Wars weapons, like the Imperial blasters and the I think you can get like at some point you can get the handgun that Han Solo uses, and thermal detonators.
Wow.
Like it's just fantastic. And you you go on Jabba's cruiser. You go in a super star destroyer.
Wow. It's a wide-ranging game.
Yes. It's a very cool game. And like I said, like every mission has different objectives that you have to complete. And that was not something that first-person shooters did at the time. They just, You just went in and you shot everything that you could. And you got key cards and stuff. And that's, I mean, a lot of times your objectives are just kind of replacements for the key cards.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're just kind of stand-ins for the same thing. But it didn't, you know, it was a facade, but it worked.
Right. I mean, especially for a generation of people who loved Star Wars, like, being able to insert yourself into a situation and being able to make a key card, you know, the plans to the Death Star.
It was great. And I've got to say, like, I downloaded the PlayStation 3 version of that because they have it, like PS1 Classics.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's great.
And I played it recently, and I just sat down and I ended up playing for like 3 hours just straight. I just kept playing. I just did not want to stop.
Wow.
It still really holds up, and if we had done this episode prior to me playing Dark Forces again recently, I probably would have told you that Rogue Squadron was my favorite Star Wars game of all time. But after having played through both of them recently, it's easily Dark Forces.
And is that just because Dark Forces holds up better than Rogue Squadron?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's still a great game. Yep.
Yeah. Do you, so I guess a couple questions. Do you think that Dark Forces like went on to really influence like either like Star Wars canon or because you said like the future installments starred Katarn, right?
Yeah. There were several other ones.
And did it kind of go on to influence other games? I don't know.
I don't know.
Do you think like they looked at Dark Forces for something like GoldenEye?
I mean, maybe. I can't really speak to that, but I all I can say is that game made a lot of tiny little innovations in the first-person genre, and maybe they were things that would have eventually happened anyway. But
I mean, they're still hard to figure out at the time. Like, I think back to like what you said about Ico in our last episode about just animations for walking upstairs and like getting the legs to bend right. Like that's a really tiny thing, but if you look back at games at the time or that had come out before, there is a little part of my brain that goes, "Oh man, they're not walking right up those stairs. They're just using the normal walking animation and like moving up diagonally." Right. And it looks weird and janky and kind of gross.
Yeah.
But you know, a little improvement, like just changing the walking animation to a stair climbing animation, it does a lot.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. It's, I don't know, it's just a really good game. If you have a PlayStation 3, I would say download it. If you have Steam, download it on that. It's just a really good game. I liked it. It's fun.
Okay.
I think it's like $5 now. And if you appreciate first-person shooters and their history, that's an important game for the development of the genre, I think.
Would you put it up there as one of the best games, period? Or is this just a really good game?
No. This is one of the best games, period.
Okay.
If you asked me what is the best Star Wars game, that's what I would say. And in general, if you asked me for my top 10 first-person shooters of all time, it would probably be on the list. So yes.
Okay, so you're not just bringing this up because we're pigeonholing this episode as only Star Wars games. You're bringing this up because you believe it deserves to be talked about on our podcast, where we do talk about the best games, period.
I genuinely believe this is one of the best games, period. Yes.
Okay. Wow. All right.
Period.
I don't know. I wasn't expecting such a defense, or not really defense because I'm not attacking it, but a impassioned plea for dark forces to be recognized.
Well, I'm impassioned.
You are just severely impassioned about Star Wars, especially because you've seen the movie, and we're not going to talk about it at all on this episode.
No, we won't.
But you've seen the movie, and I have not seen it yet, and I am upset and saddened by that fact.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not my problem.
It's my problem now.
Yeah, it's yours. So,
also,
what is your favorite? Okay,
sorry.
Go ahead.
I saw people talking about the movie on Twitter and like details, and I started reading, and I was like, somebody was talking about like some sort of spy master, and I was like, abort. I jumped off of social media immediately. So I've been operating on like social media kung fu to like try and escape spoilers. And I know you can't see what I was just doing there, but I was doing like karate chop motions toward my mic.
I will say this. So before I saw Star Wars, it was the night before. It was Friday, so it was the same night that I was seeing Star Wars, and we were in Subway, and we were just getting something for dinner, because we were in a hurry, and I knew I needed to leave in a little bit to go to the movie, and we're standing there, and there's a theater in the same mall where the Subway is.
Okay.
So it had just gotten out from a showing, and there were a bunch of kids, and there were these two teenagers, this kid, this boy, and this girl, and they started talking, and they were right in front of me in the line at Subway, and Coley was there, and I had Quinn in my arms, and they started talking like specifics about specific characters and who they are, and I'm like la 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 la, like. Turned out it was a mystery to them, and it's still a mystery to me after having seen it. So it's not really a spoiler, but I'm not going to say it here. Right. But I didn't want them to say anything else, so I started singing to myself and to Quinn, and I said to Coley, "You need to stay here and order me a meatball sub. I am leaving," and I left, and Quinn and I just walked outside, back and forth until Coley came out with the subs.
I mean, you're just being a good parent at that point. You're protecting your daughter from spoilers.
I mean, it's terrible. You gotta save the children from spoilers.
Think of the children. I mean, come on.
That's right.
Yeah.
I was so mad at them. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
So anyway, what is your favorite Star Wars game?
Well, I think that not only is Knights of the Old Republic probably easily, I'm not gonna say easily, because there was a little bit of a debate in me about whether or not I should do Knights of the Old Republic or Star Wars Rogue Leader.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
The one for
Yep,
GameCube.
It's a good one. Yep.
I love that game. I think it's gorgeous, and I think it probably has the best Death Star trench run.
Yes.
Well, maybe not even the best, the second best, because I think the first one for me is probably still the one for like Atari, that Star Wars game.
Really?
Well, it was just so. Even if you go back and play that one now, it's exhilarating and like strangely so, because especially looking back at it from 2015, the technology is clearly inferior, but what they managed to do with like Atari hardware is not built for 3D flying.
It ended up actually kind of looking like the heads-up display that Luke decided not to use.
It does, yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe that was probably intentional, now that you mention it, but
yeah,
just I really like that Death Star trench run, and that they managed to do it way back when is really incredible. but I'm totally going off on a huge tangent right now. Knights of the Old Republic is easily one of the greatest RPGs of all time, and I think going back to it now, it doesn't quite hold up as well as it used to, and that's probably because of a lot of technology. Technology has moved on, and going back to old 3D games is pretty rough, even if they were considered very beautiful for the time, which KotOR definitely was. You get to walk around Dantooine, which Leia mentions briefly in the first Star Wars movie.
Yeah.
You find out it's a Jedi enclave, and if you just walk around that planet, there's grass swaying everywhere, and it's an alien life and all sorts of cool stuff just throughout the entire game. I think you go to Tatooine at one point, and as you walk around, there's little sand blowing everywhere. It's really great. It's really rough. It gets everywhere. It's coarse.
Sand is coarse. This is correct.
Yep. And I'm rambling.
No, you're not.
Well, so Knights of the Old Republic, I should probably start off by saying, has one of the coolest stories and has largely been kind of hailed as the greatest addition to Star Wars canon since the original saga.
So give me a rundown of the story and why it's so great.
Okay. Well, but before I get into that, I should mention that it is no longer considered canon.
Yeah.
But I do think the backstory to this game is pretty interesting too, so I'll try and kind of insert that stuff in here.
Okay.
BioWare was actually given a choice of settings for the game. They could have either done what they did and do it 4,000 years in the past, or they could have done a present-day Star Wars movie set to tie in with Star Wars Episode 2. And they chose the one way in the past because very little had been done in the extended universe in that time period, and it gave them a lot more creative freedom to kind of do what they wanted.
That was the right choice.
And yes, definitely the right choice. And not only was it the right choice, but even though a lot of this stuff isn't canon anymore, it had a huge effect on the books and different forms of media that kind of came after that played with the backstory of Star Wars and kind of fleshed out this universe, this galaxy that Star Wars takes place in. And so it's 4,000 years before anything happens in Star Wars. And in fact, it's so far in the past that most people have no idea what's going on in this new universe. And right off the bat, your character, who you go through a character creation process, and you make your personalized character who has the skills and appearance that you want him to have, or her.
Yep.
And then you immediately are thrown into a battle. And the battle is going on, and your character wakes up, and they're aboard this ship called the Endar Spire. And this guy runs into the room. He's like, "We're under attack," and it gets really exciting.
Mm-hmm.
And that ship is kind of your tutorial. And
I couldn't get past that part.
Oh, really? Okay, so that's how little you've been exposed to Knights of the Old Republic.
Yep.
Did you play it recently, or kind of more when it came out?
No, I played it probably the tail end of the Xbox life cycle. The original Xbox.
Oh, so you played it on Xbox?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, it's kind of rough to play on Xbox. I'm not gonna lie.
Okay.
I vastly enjoy playing it on PC. Vastly prefer playing it on PC.
All right.
But yeah, so that ship is kind of your tutorial, and it teaches you.
Yeah.
What are you giggling about?
At my ineptitude at RPGs.
Well, I don't think that it's necessarily your fault, because it's a very strange RPG system, and it's designed specifically for Knights of the Old Republic. BioWare went and basically completely revolutionized the style of game. Like, they completely changed RPGs as we know them with Knights of the Old Republic. Because prior to that, they'd been a lot of turn-based RPGs.
Yeah.
And that was pretty much it. Like, you had turn-based RPGs or kind of strategic RPGs that were still turn-based. And what KotOR did was it kind of bridged the gap. It's kind of the missing link between old school turn-based RPG stuff and new school, almost real-time stuff. And not almost, but like fully real-time RPGs. And it came out in 2003, I think. Yeah, 2003.
Yep.
And so it has this system where you input commands and then your character kind of rolls through them. And each command is an individual attack that's based on a D20 system. So every attack you make, there's an invisible random number generator that determines all the math behind each attack. Like, it'll roll an invisible D20 and be like, you hit this person or you missed this person, or this attack works or that attack doesn't work. And it's one of those things that seems simple. Like you were saying with Dark Forces, it seems simple, but in practice it seems simple, but there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes that is very complex and very forward-thinking that I think is really cool. It comes off as kind of weird, especially if you're going back like a couple years, because this game changed so much that by the time a few years had gone by, that system was so streamlined that it wasn't noticeable anymore. Or they had found better ways of doing it. And that's where you get to things like Mass Effect. And where Mass Effect is an RPG, but it's also a third-person shooter that works very well. Or moderately well.
Oh, man.
Kind of going off on a huge tangent here.
No, it's okay. I mean, I think you're right. Like, I think that's part of what I had problems with Knights of the Old Republic is, like, I had played Fable and Elder Scrolls Morrowind. Like, I played Morrowind and enjoyed it. And I finished Fable. And I think I had even played Jade Empire a bit before. I played probably like through 10 hours of that game before I played any of Knights of the Old Republic. And I guess I just didn't understand why the system had to be the way it was. Like, I just couldn't grasp the combat and what.
Well, in practice it looks very weird because you select an attack and it's not like Dark Souls combat where you press a button and you get that immediate feedback. Instead, you're queuing up attacks for, your attack animations, I guess. And there's like an invisible timer that determines how fast you can attack. And it has to roll through each different attack and complete the animations and stuff. And it's very odd, I guess.
Yeah, it is. I think what was weird about it is because you don't have immediate control over your character's movements.
Right.
In the moment. Like, even in other RPGs, my experience with RPGs is limited, but what was hard for me to understand was that, like, in other RPGs I had played, like Final Fantasy VII, you could select an attack and your character would do it. And in Knights of the Old Republic, it was really difficult to keep track of what was going on in the battle and what my character was actually doing.
Yeah, and a lot of that is because it's based on basically a D&D system. Like, in the background, there is a... it's like every attack, there's an invisible person rolling a dice, and it takes a little time for those numbers to be crunched, and for the visual feedback to get there. And I think a lot of that comes from BioWare being a very traditional RPG company. Like, the previous game they made before KotOR, I believe, was the expansion to Baldur's Gate 2.
Yeah.
And, like, Baldur's Gate 2, for anyone who hasn't played it, that game is massive. Like, it would take you several days just to play through the core campaign without doing any side quests. And that's because they made their games from a very traditional RPG mindset. And that is very much inspired by... they might have made Neverwinter Nights before KotOR.
Yeah, I think they did. Yeah. I think you're right.
Anyway, they're they take a lot from traditional pen and paper RPGs, which is really neat. But this is all a very long way of saying that the intro level on the Endar Spire has to get you used to that combat and get you engaged enough in it to the point where you just kind of roll with this combat system.
Okay.
And if you can do that, then the game opens up for you and it becomes this sprawling quest, because the intro level has you trying to rescue this Jedi Knight named Bastila.
Okay.
And she is a very special Jedi who has this ability called battle meditation. And after the tutorial, you find out that there is this galactic war going on against this rising Sith power. And that it's led by this Darth Malak, who used to be an apprentice to a different Dark Lord of the Sith called Darth Revan, but Revan has disappeared. You go through this game and you're leveling up and you're slowly gaining abilities, and you get some Jedi training at a Jedi temple, and you then receive a vision, and it hints that Darth Malak's power comes from this ancient, basically artifact space station called the Starforge, that's capable of just churning out ships and robots and weapons and all the resources you need essentially to wage your own personal war. And it's so powerful that it has created an enemy force that is capable of destroying the Republic on a galactic scale. And so then it becomes going from planet to planet to receive different clues as to where the Starforge might be. And while you're doing that, your character's also having visions of kind of like a past life, and finding out that the ultimate reveal of the game is that the player's character is Darth Revan. Darth Malak betrayed Revan, and during the course of that betrayal, there was a Jedi strike team that was being led to defeat Revan that included Bastila, and Bastila came upon Revan, brought him back to the Jedi Council where he was healed, and then he had his memory wiped in order to... And I'm saying he, but it can also be a she. The memory was wiped in order to protect the Republic and possibly use Revan as an ally. And at that point in the revelation of events... Wow, that was a terrible sentence. At that point, Revan can decide whether or not to side with the Jedi or to embrace his former Sith nature and defeat Malak to then, take over the galaxy uncontested. And that kind of takes place during an assault on the Starforge. And it's really neat because over the course of your adventures, you accumulate these different companions, and it's one of the first games that had a kind of good or evil system. And I'm sure It's not the first, but it's one of the first, and it's one of the most influential. And that good and evil system kind of determines how the different companions react to you. Like if you're evil, the more evil-oriented companions love you. If you're bad, or if you're good, the good-oriented companions love you. And at the end of the game, when you kind of make your choices, depending on how you've played the game, different characters will follow you or, resist you. And so, for example, if you go bad at the end of the game and choose to embrace your Sith nature, you end up having to kill like 2 of your companions.
Wow.
They turn on you and say this isn't right and try and stop you. And some of them just outright run away because you're probably going to murder them. Looking at you, Carthonassi.
So, all right, I have a question. One thing that I've never understood about that game, because I have heard that story before and how that all plays out, but how does nobody else recognize him and be like, "Oh, hi, please don't kill me"?
Because Darth Revan always wore a mask, and You're not wearing a mask. And no one knows where Revan came from, so it's not like Revan has childhood friends that are like, "Oh, I know that guy. He was a Dark Lord of the Sith." It's kind of like the Darth Vader thing going on. Like, no one would recognize Darth Vader if he walked around without his mask on, except maybe go like, "That's a horribly burned person. You look like you were burned in a volcano and then cut up by a Jedi."
Yeah.
So.
Okay. But I always thought at the end when Darth Vader takes off his mask and looks like just heck, I always thought that was because he was getting electrocuted by the Emperor for so long when he picked him up.
Oh, no.
But then again, because Luke doesn't really look that way, and he was electrocuted, so yeah.
Well, also, if there's like a scene, it was either earlier in Return of the Jedi or in Empire Strikes Back where you see the back of his head without the mask on, and that's all white and gross.
Oh yeah, and that's all messed up. Yep.
So.
True dizzle.
True to the yizzle. So, Knights of the Old Republic is still super influential because I think without Knights of the Old Republic, BioWare might not have ever made the leap to between Baldur's Gate and Neverwinter Nights to Mass Effect. And I think Knights of the Old Republic is kind of where they showed they had sci-fi chops. Yeah. And you have people like Casey Hudson, who is the project manager during Knights of the Old Republic, and then making the leap to being the project manager of all of the Mass Effect games. And you have Drew Karpyshyn. I probably butchered his name, and I'm not going to try and say it again because it has way too many Y's in it for any one man's name. But he cut his teeth in Baldur's Gate and then Knights of the Old Republic, and a lot of novel writing, and went on to write a lot of Mass Effect stuff up until midway through Mass Effect 3. And there's so much in KotOR that is even just directly influenced. Like, its influence is even felt, I think, in some of the films, because a lot of the visual designs you'll see in KotOR were directly approved by the Lucas Ranch, and all their designs had to go through that first and get approval. And LucasArts actually did all of the sound design and the animal noises, the alien sound effects, all that stuff. That wasn't handled by BioWare. And I don't know. I think Knights of the Old Republic has an enduring legacy in the world of, I guess, kind of bridging the gap between PC RPGs and console RPGs.
Yeah, actually, that's an important... That's an important thing about that game. Along with Bethesda, I think BioWare is the leading they're the two leading Western RPG developers, and they've been doing it since the Xbox days, bringing consoles over, RPGs over to consoles and making them work.
Yeah. I mean, even with all the glitches that some of Bethesda's stuff comes with, they're still great games. It doesn't matter. The glitches are largely inconsequential to the overall game experience, I think, for most people. But that's another one of those small things that just kind of moves everything forward just a little bit. And I think that KotOR kind of represents a turning point for video games in terms of writing as well. One script for all of the dialogue in Knights of the Old Republic is 10 5-ring binders full of text. And I think it totals like 15,000 pages.
Wow.
And those are the kind of productions that we're talking about for AAA games today.
Yeah.
And probably even bigger for a lot of the more expansive RPGs. But this kind of laid the groundwork for that. And I think that KotOR, I don't know, I think that it should get a lot of credit for bringing games that far, if that makes sense, because it's so cinematic, and I think there's a lot of people who are kind of divided on the word cinematic when used with games, but I think being visually appealing and using the language of cinema is a good thing for a lot of games, especially ones that use cutscenes.
Yeah.
And being able to capture the feeling of the movies is super important for a Star Wars game. It just is.
Well, not only that, but it was cinematic, but it also it integrated choice and player agency into that cinematic story, which is something that the movies just simply couldn't offer. And so just for that, it has value in that universe.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of talked a little bit about Darth Vader before, but, KotOR is kind of like asking the question and giving people the way to find out, what if Darth Vader didn't turn good at the end of Return of the Jedi? What if you as a person had the ability to say, Darth Vader redeems himself, or Darth Vader embraces the dark side and kills the Emperor? What would happen? And I think that's a really powerful thing in video games, and I think KotOR just begins to scratch the surface of that, and it gets more deeply explored as games have progressed since then. KotOR and Fable, I think, can kind of be credited a lot with that. And it did start a very annoying trend for a while of poorly implemented versions of that.
Right.
But I think, on the whole, that kind of benefited a lot of games going forward.
So I want to ask you, before we wrap up, what are your thoughts on Knights of the Old Republic 2?
Oof.
By Obsidian.
I think it had the potential to be the better of the two.
Okay.
It ultimately didn't become the better of the two, and I think that's because Obsidian just wasn't given enough time to finish the game. A lot of the problems with Knights of the Old Republic 2 come straight up down to the fact that they were forced to finish the game before it was ready. Like, they were given a certain amount of time, and then I think they were forced to ship it like 2 months early. And that's because Knights of the Old Republic 1 was such a big success that they wanted to follow it up as quickly as possible. And
yeah,
what ended up happening because they shipped it early was large portions of the game were just cut, and they were never finished. And so, in fact, there's a very good mod. If you're interested in seeing the game restored and actually, better and fixed, because it was shipped with all of the code for those areas still intact, just inaccessible and locked away on the disk. Modders worked for like 7 years to unlock that content and finish it. And so if you download the restoration mod, and you can do that on Steam, if you buy a copy of Knights of the Old Republic 2 on Steam, you can download this mod through the Steam Workshop, and it fixes the game. And and here's the thing about the version that they shipped, which is just horribly broken. The entire ending of the game is so horribly mangled that it will literally make you do a double take because you don't know what's going on. You literally get just teleported to different spots with no rhyme or reason, and major villains are just killed and never given, like, why are you here? What can you do? I don't know your name, even.
So it's the ending of Bioshock Infinite?
Haha, no. But, and it's actually really good once you have all of that stuff in the game to make sense of it, I think. Yeah. Cool. And it deals a lot with, like, post-traumatic stress, and it has a very almost 70s vibe to it. Like, I could see them having made it into a film in the 70s.
Huh.
Yeah.
Does it have a lot of the same characters? Does it follow the same storyline?
No, it's essentially Knights of the Republic 2 is almost like a Vietnam allegory.
Okay, so it's a completely different story.
Yeah. It takes place a few years after the events of the first game, and Revan disappeared going off into deep space to fight some sort of threat that they foresaw. And meanwhile, oh wait. I'm just trying to figure the plot of the game out in my head. Sorry.
It's okay.
The Jedi were almost completely wiped out by the Sith in this war and have had to go into hiding. And the Jedi Council has been dissolved, and Jedi are basically considered persona non grata. Like, there are bounties out on Jedi because they caused so much destruction in the Jedi-Sith war. And a lot of people don't even know the distinction between a Jedi and a Sith. They just know that they can use dangerous force powers, right? And suddenly this person who's been just kind of traveling around the galaxy, and they're referred to during the story as the Outcast, winds up on this mining station after being found adrift, and wakes up in kind of a medical facility, and where everyone's been murdered. And that's kind of the introduction of Knights of the Old Republic 2, and the general plot is that this outcast was originally a Jedi, but had been severed off from the Force by the Jedi Council because they went and fought with Revan in the Mandalorian Wars. That basically, like, in the past, the previous threat before the Sith had been the Mandalorians. And they had just waged like this gigantic war against the galaxy because they like fighting war. And the ultimate result of that was that they blew up the planet Malachor, I think Malachor 4, and killed millions of people. Just millions of soldiers died in an instant. And the trauma of that event has completely destroyed the the main character. And then he was severed off from the Force, and because he's one of the last Jedi left, everyone's hunting him down, even though he doesn't have a direct connection to the Force, but he starts slowly getting that power back. And then other Sith Lords have been slowly coming into the galaxy to kind of finish off the Republic. And they're all somehow related to the explosion on Malachor 4.
Okay.
And so it all kind of comes back around to that conflict. And it's an interesting game. There's a lot of interesting stuff, and a lot of the companions that you recruit are all related to that previous conflict too, and they all have, different problems with post-traumatic stress and
wow. Interesting.
Yeah, and like there's issues brought up of like abuse and like I don't know, it's a very heavy, dark, and interesting game that was kind of hamstrung from the start by being shipped so early.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's very possible that if it had been given enough time, I might have spent this episode talking about Knights of the Old Republic 2 instead of Knights of the Old Republic.
Well, it sounds like either way they both have merit, and Knights of the Old Republic, just out of being the first one, just that alone deserves recognition. Would you call it one of the best games, period?
Knights of the Old Republic? Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Just on its historical merits alone, and I think it has one of the most legendary story reveals of any game. I think it's time to wrap up the show.
Put a bow on it? Okay.
This Christmas Star Wars episode.
Yes, thank you so much for sticking with us. Sorry we were without Jeremy tonight, but hopefully Jack and I still entertained you all. And again, thank you to everybody who listens to the show and supports us and continues to support the best games, period. Jack, thank you for joining me tonight. And thank you, listeners, for listening to episode 5 of the best games, period, the special Star Wars week and Christmas week episode. Merry Christmas if that's your thing and you celebrate it. Otherwise, happy Kwanzaa, and hope you had a nice Hanukkah and great Festivus, whatever else
happy
it is
holidays
that you celebrate. If you like the best games, period, please let us know on Twitter at best games, period. Let your friends know. Tell the whole world about us, because we want more listeners. And it turns out every week we get a few more listeners, and we're really happy about that. So thank you to everybody who is listening. Like I said, you can follow us on Twitter at Best Games, period. You can follow Jack on Twitter at RiverboatJack. You can follow Jeremy at MojoMonkey12. And you can follow me at IndieJones84. You can listen to the Best Games, period, on SoundCloud, on our hosting site Libsyn, and you can listen to it now on iTunes as well. You can also watch the video version of every episode on our YouTube channel, The Best Games, period, on YouTube. All of this goes up every Monday, so look forward to it. Subscribe so that way you never miss an episode. Please write us some reviews on iTunes. That would be fantastic. And otherwise, thank you again for your support, and hopefully you have a happy holidays, and we will see you in the new year, because I believe the next episode won't air until the new year.
That is possible, I guess. And you know what? Even if you hated the show, we'd love your feedback, so please feel free to just leave a hateful comment or a positive comment. We'd much prefer those. And next week we'll be talking about our game of the year.
Or just a constructive comment.
Yes, constructive comment. Don't post a hateful comment. We don't. I guess we don't want to encourage hate.
Yeah.
We want to encourage love, especially for this show.
That's right.